Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 11, Intro to Black Creative Expression. We are getting down to the wire. The next two videos, this one and the last one, are the last two slideshow overview lectures for the semester, and they're both on the theme of Afrofuturism. This week is going to be an introduction to Afrofuturism, and then next week we'll go a little bit more into Afrofuturism and environmental issues. So I'm going to go ahead and start this presentation. All right, I'm going to see if I can make the video of myself a little bigger, which I keep forgetting to do every time I do these. All right, so here we have an artwork by Lamar Peterson, and he's a painter, a fine art painter who has, it seems like he's probably been trained with a background in illustration. And so his paintings have an illustrative quality to them. And although he's not purely an Afrofuturist painter, he does fall under the realm of the Black speculative. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this particular week. In the 60s, Nichols once complained to Martin Luther King Jr. about her, she had complaints about her role on Star Trek. And he advised her to stay on the show, that it was important for the world to see that Black people existed in the future. So she stayed with the show. It's just a little interesting fact that I wanted to bring out to you all. You're going to be taking a look at work by Alicia B Wormley. She calls herself an interdisciplinary artist and cultural producer. So what that means also in this particular project is she's doing a social practice or a public practice kind of artwork. And this is her concept. This is her idea, that there would be billboards in Black neighborhoods that say there are Black people in the future. So the first one was posted in her home city. I believe it's in Philadelphia, maybe Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. And now she's opened up the project to other people to submit their ideas that are the same or very similar to what she's doing. So she wanted to open up conversations around Black issues and particularly gentrification. So just a response to there are Black people in the future, let's look at an iconographic or iconic music group that's Parliament. They often performed with Funkadelic as well. So you'll see Parliament and Funkadelic. And if you're not of that generation or know their music that well, you might mix them up like me, which is, oh, well, where does Parliament end and where does Funkadelic begin? Were they one together? Which artists were in which group? Like that kind of thing. But this is an album cover. And since so many of you said that you love the album covers in the lecture a couple weeks ago, I decided to use a couple here as well. So Parliament is really well known for their album covers, and you can see here is a Black person coming out of a space shuttle. The song is called Mothership Connection, and so I'll go on a little bit more. Here's the actual ship, which I'm not sure if this ship was used, but a spaceship would descend on their concerts, or at least one. I'm not sure how many it descended on, but the one that you're going to be looking at, a spaceship does arrive in the concert in 1976 in Houston, Texas. And Afrofuturism is becoming a force. It is becoming a discourse in itself. And it's an interdisciplinary discourse with international participants and international issues now. So it was really difficult for me to try to narrow this down to a 45-minute slideshow introduction, but I'm gonna do my best with it. So here are some people that have become, and figures, I should say figures instead of people, who've become iconic for explaining to someone who has no idea what Afrofuturism is. Maybe they can say one or two or three names or things, like something that Black people created that's Afrofuturistic. And then someone can go, oh yeah, okay, all right, I kind of get that. Like if you say Parliament Mothership Connection and they know funk music, they're like, oh, okay, I kind of got that. Or Sun Ra, or Janelle Monáe, or Missy Elliott. We'll see some more in a moment. So why don't you all just pause this for a moment and go ahead and read this slide about what Afrofuturism is. If I tried to narrow it down to one or two simple sentences, I would say that it is Black people with sort of spacey elements in highly imaginative genres. So that could be music, it could be film, it could be theater, it could be fashion, it could be visual art. It spans a bunch of genres, but basically it's kind of science fiction-y and futuristic and speculative. So definitely we have to use the word speculative because that is an important term, you know, to avoid saying Black science fiction, because Black science fiction is a thing, but it's much narrower than Afrofuturism is. If you were to just keyword search Afrofuturism on Google, you might get some images that look like this, give you some ideas of what Afrofuturism might mean. One of the earliest texts, one of the earliest scholars / theorists of Afrofuturism is Alondra Nelson. And so why don't you take a moment to read what the definition of Afrofuturism is in this text, this journal that came out in summer of 2002. And then, this is the same thing here. I just cropped it and made it a little bigger, even though it's a little blurry, for you to be able to see the words a little better. So Alondra Nelson, she may have been the creator, I'm not sure, but certainly there was a listserv as early as the late 80s, but definitely into the 90s, that started the whole conversation of Afrofuturism. Yeah, listserv is something we don't know about in this generation. Not even I know about what a listserv is, but it was a way that people were having a digital conversation with each other in different places about this new thing that they didn't know what they were doing, but they were interested in these topics, and then it got a name. And the crazy thing is the name came from a white person. I'm gonna skip Alondra for a moment. Actually, let me just do these in order and then I'll come back to that, to the fact that how Afrofuturism got its name. So Alondra Nelson, here's a GIF of her. And I just figured out that I can put GIFs into the slideshows maybe like a couple weeks ago or something. So this particular slideshow, I thought I might try more of them because, you know, it's Afrofuturism and that's about the use of technology sometimes. So Alondra Nelson is a professor. I think she's a director of a department at a university in New York. And so she has also written a recent book about DNA as recreational genealogy and how it can make a case for reparations for slavery. I am a person who's a recreational genealogy, and I have traced 5 of my 6 grandparents' ancestry into the slave era, back into the slave era as far as the 1600s. And that is highly unusual. So I could say the 1600s for mostly the white ancestors, but it's kind of hard to say that for the Black ancestors. So the Black ancestors typically stop between 1800 and about 1850. And that is a way that a lot of Black people are using technology these days to reconstruct family. So we talked about family over the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure if I talked about this kind of movement that's happening amongst Black people who are doing recreational genealogy to reconstruct their own ancestry and family histories and try to figure out where they came from and what are their stories and how did those people survive and what else can they find out about themselves. I in particular found out amazing, amazing things and even have hung out with and talked to cousins who connect through DNA, even after 175 years of separation from the African continent. These are cousins who have 4 grandparents born in Africa and come from Africa. One of them actually had ancestors who came from the United States free. They were enslaved, but they went to Liberia, which was set up as a colony of free Blacks. Initially, it was a city that was set up in Liberia, and then eventually that became Liberia. At the time that it was set up, I don't think it was actually called Liberia. I'm not really sure what it was called at the time, but there were different ethnic groups living in the area. So Alondra Nelson has something apparently called the coronavirus syllabus, or yes, I haven't looked this up, but I thought it was interesting and I plan to do that after I created this slideshow, is look this up and just see what she put on this quote unquote coronavirus syllabus that we should all know about. So what is Afrofuturism? Again, you can like stop and just read this. I won't read through it. but I can tell you that Afrofuturism encompasses a lot of different genres. The Black speculative is probably a better term than Afrofuturism, but Afrofuturism is kind of catchy and I think it's going to stick. So a lot of things that are not actually Afrofuturistic are being put under this sort of blanket of Afrofuturism when they're magical realism, they are fantasy, they are comic books. I mean, there could be any number of different things that are going under this category of Afrofuturism. So you might hear me interchangeably use the term Afrofuturism versus the Black speculative, okay? Another definition of Afrofuturism here. Another tenet or trait of Afrofuturism and the Black speculative is that time tends to be layered. And what I mean by that is that past, present, and future can be in the image or in the song or in the dance or in the story, for example. And it is a more fluid perception and creation of time space than linear space. And the interesting thing is, to me, that it kind of corresponds to Black music in a certain way, being polyrhythmic and very layered and textured. So think about that as you're experiencing these materials. And when by materials and text, I mean the songs, the dances, the literature, et cetera, for the week. So here's a statement from Mark Deary. And again, Mark Deary is the person who's given credit for coining the term Afrofuturism. And a thing I should mention is that not all Afrofuturists or things that have been created that fall under the blanket or category of Afrofuturism have been created by Black people, which is an interesting thing to think about when we think about this concept of Afrofuturism. In the future, who gets to be Afrofuturist? Who gets to have their work considered being Afrofuturist? And who determines that? So here, I am going to read this one. This comment, this quote. This is from Mark Deary. In a very real sense, African Americans are the descendants of alien abductees. They inhabit a sci-fi nightmare in which unseen, but no less impassable force fields of intolerance frustrate their movements. Official histories undo what has been done, and technology is too often brought to bear on Black bodies. Branding, forced sterilization, the Tuskegee experiment, and tasers come readily to mind. Well, we can also think of guns if we want to add that to weapons. All right, and here's a chart. So this might help you. Black speculative fiction genre chart. So you can see these overlapping genres. And I think this will do a better job than me trying to list to you all the different things that Afrofuturism or the Black speculative encompasses. The main thing you need to know is that this type of work asks the question of what if? Like, what if? It asks questions about the future. What if this? What if, what would this have been like? Because sometimes it's about the past. So it's retrofuturism. It's recreating history in the past. So we have fantasy as a big genre here, alternate history, which is what I was just talking about. Horror could be a genre. Black science fiction, for example. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff here. Afrofuturism, Blacktastic, magical realism, supernatural, sword and soul, steampunk, diesel funk. I don't even know some of these. This is my first time, seeing some of these terms. Realistic sci-fi. So you've got not only just Black speculative, but in relationship to the conventional kinds of speculative fiction. We even got Blaxploitation in here and dystopia. So take a look and study that for a moment. Let me see if I can move this. Okay. All right, and John Jennings is an artist and scholar of Afrofuturism. He is one of the most recognizable names in the scholarship of Afrofuturism. He put together some of the first conferences that I attended, and he invited me to speak at the conferences. And I was like amazed because I don't even think this was 10 years ago. I think it was like about 8 years ago, actually, maybe 7 to 8 years ago. Most of these conferences would have like no one at them. It was like no one was paying attention to Afrofuturism. No one cared. This was like a nerdy, blurty thing that some academics got together and talked about amongst themselves. And so now it has exploded since Black Panther. It is really on the verge of becoming mainstream, which is fascinating that it's happened so quickly. So these are two books that if you're really interested in Afrofuturism, they do a good job of explaining the basics of what Afrofuturism is. So this one is definitely like written by one person and just explains what Afrofuturism is from, you know, their point of view. And that's Ytasha Womack. And this one is actually a compilation of essays, and they are assembled by Reynaldo Anderson and Charles Jones. And so the artwork is done by, the cover artwork is done by John Jennings. And so this is just an example of the type of symposiums that were happening, that have been happening around the world now on the concept of Afrofuturism. I should say it's a concept and it's going further to becoming a discourse. It has an aesthetic and a discourse. So here's Reynaldo Anderson here, the editor of the book I just showed you. And he's written a Black Speculative Arts Manifesto. And it's on the BSAM website. So that's what this stands for, Black Speculative Arts Manifesto. Arts Movement is what I meant to say. And so here is a logo for the it's kind of a loose organization. And you can go and see some of the events that have been put together, symposiums, even art exhibits. This is another image by John Jennings. And it just says the Black Speculative is an arts movement and Afrofuturism is an Afrocentric technocultural social philosophy. So what is technocultural? That's another reason why I included this screenshot here, because I wanted us to look at that term. The chair wrote this into the syllabus that technoculture should be something that students in this class need to know when they leave the course. So here's a definition of technoculture, and it's super blurry. I apologize, but it was a slide that someone else created, and it was the best one I could find that summarized the term. There's a couple other terms here, but I'm gonna read this just in case you can't see it. Technoculture, the reshaping of culture through variables of technology, including computers, gaming, mobile phone applications, the internet, connectivity, and even hookup casual sex apps. So basically technoculture is the technological aspect of our culture. It's how we're creating culture, it's how we're interacting with culture through technology. So techno, that part of the word, is also a form of music, and its birthplace is Detroit. And this is Juan Atkins, who I met at a gas station 20 years ago here in Los Angeles. He was living here for a little while, and then he ended up moving away, and I'm not sure where he lives now, but he's continued to DJ and make music around the world. And so Juan Atkins is credited as being the originator or coining the term techno. Juan Atkins is from Detroit. He is a real Detroit kind of guy. I talked to him extensively about how he came up with the idea for this music. And what he told me personally, this is not something I read. I spoke to the man. I interacted with him. He was my friend for this amount of time when he lived in LA, like a year or something like that too, before he moved. He said, well, I was DJing parties. And then he went into detail about how DJing a party was so much different than it is now. It involves something like having to play a song on records and then disconnect and reconnect cables after he played every song. Which sounds absurd to us now, right? Because we can just program a playlist and just play the music, right? Seamlessly. But that's how he had to DJ. So, you know, you were a good DJ based on if you could play good music for the crowd, but also how fast you were and how good you are with that wiring. So he said that the people that he was DJing for were, and he thought of himself as different. He thought of himself as more blue collar, as more working class than the people that he was DJing for. They were bougie kids to him. They were middle class and upper middle class kids. So he wanted to create something new. Again, these are things he told me personally. He wanted to create a new form of music that was inspired by science fiction, He loved Dune and Star Trek, and we talked about that a lot because we're both fans of both. And then he also said that the sounds of the factories as he would walk through the city were so interesting to him that he wanted to make music that reflected the sounds of the city. So I want you to keep that in mind when we're talking about technoculture. That's an example of technoculture, how technology is an experience for artists, but everyone especially, but definitely artists. And artists are interpreting the world around us and creating things out of that. So that's the story on that. That's the anecdote. Here's a picture of him when this is him in the middle, when he was younger with some of the other originators of techno music. And you can stop this and just read through that. There's a song that I put in your module for you to check out. It's called Vibe, If I Back It Up by Cookie Kawaii. It's a contemporary type of music. This song went viral during the beginning of the quarantine of the pandemic, the quarantine time of the pandemic. And I first found out about it by watching a viral TikTok video where someone had recorded their cat and made a little short video of their cat in the house because they were quarantined. Who else were they gonna see? And they made the cat like dancing and moving around and doing things to the song. So there, every city, no, I shouldn't say every city, in many cities in the United States and outside of the United States, there are forms of Black electronic music that are kind of local or even regional at the most. Those songs and those artists don't get known nationally. They don't get on the radio. Every once in a while, an artist from one of those communities will get a larger type of airplay or even go national or mainstream, but it's not that often. So there's a lot of music that's happening locally that a lot of people in the United States who are not part of those communities never get to hear. So techno, house, hip hop, juke, jit, hyphy, Baltimore club, bounce, and then outside of the United States, Kuduro, Afrobeat, and Rabbledai. And then I add a trap at the end. I'm not really sure if it counts as being something separate than hip hop. Someone who knows rap music better needs to tell me if I should make trap a separate category. But sometimes what happens is artists that go mainstream, they tend to change their music so it fits more of a formula for the mainstream. But the other thing that happens is sometimes the artists who are not part of those communities are inspired by the music from these areas. And then they'll take that style and make a song out of it that, again, fits the formula for popular music across the nation. Outcast is a rap duo. Many of you probably know because they're fairly contemporary, like, you know, close within the last 10 or 15 years of being very popular, who was considered futuristic, the future of hip hop, when they came out with these amazing music videos, like around the late 90s into the early 2000s. And so you have a video there that you can go take a look at. It's not one of the ones that is particularly the most futuristic, but since this is an intro to Black creative expression class, I thought it would be really cool if you've never seen the video to take a look at it. I actually did not see the video until last night because I didn't have cable back then and I never looked at the video. So maybe you haven't either. And it's called The Art of Storytelling. And it's really cool because they're painting, they're artists in the video and there's puppets of them and they're like, the puppets are performing them. And it's really artsy and really cool and really creative. So I think you'll enjoy it a lot. If you want to check out a video that has more a sort of Afrofuturistic element to it, then you can check out this one, which is Atlians. And you'll see that they are kind of like doing that thing I told you, which is like past, present, and future, and layering time and space, where they're coming out of an Egyptian pyramid out onto a stage to perform in the present. So here is just a screenshot of The Art of Storytelling. And Missy Elliott was also an artist when she first came out who was thought of as super avant-garde, cutting edge, the future of like Black music. The way the video was done and the special effects and this futuristic idea and concepts being manifested, the art direction. Africa Bambaataa has a song called Planet Rock, and I've included the video for you to take a look at. Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force. And so this song was a super big hit. It's also been sampled a lot by later artists. And what I want you to listen to in this song is the space sounds that are actually in there. And this is like right at the brink of the proto like formation of hip hop. So you're going to hear like a lot of different elements in the music. There's going to be funk, there's going to be soul elements, there's going to be like kind of proto rap that's happening. And the whole video has amazing clips of breakdance. So what I want you to notice is how a new dance form evolved to match this new technoculture of music. And so can you be a robot when you dance and reflect this new technoculture, this new technology, and still be amazingly soulful and still actually apply aesthetic principles of African dance to your dance, traditional principles of African dance? So what I want you to think about is how adaptive African aesthetics are to various genres in the past, present, and future. So you can't see it here, but this is actually a dancer. He's dancing so fast, I couldn't get a good screenshot of his movements. So again, another thing I want you to notice is how the crowds are Black and Latino. And so, and I say that, I mean, there's a range, because there's a lot of Black people who are light skinned, and there's also a lot of Latinos who are dark skinned. So understand that I don't necessarily always mean to separate them, but I mean that when I say that together, it's the two together as a range. And then there's the Archijoy, which is a beautiful album by Janelle Monáe. It's personally one of my favorite albums ever of all time. And it's done by Janelle Monáe, who's become an icon of Afrofuturism, one of the top 10 icons of Afrofuturism. This album was done before she went mainstream, and it has a different flavor, I think, than her more pop music, which for the past, since this album, her music has been more kind of watered down and simplified, not as layered, not as polyrhythmic, more mainstream. This album is really incredibly sophisticated and artful, and is definitely the kind of like album for a music connoisseur or aficionado, especially if you like jazz and hybridization. All right, and this is Labelle. And Labelle was definitely known for these space-agey costumes. So they were existing concurrent to Parliament and Funkadelic, for example, in the 1970s. And they were a 3-woman group. One of their songs, Lady Marmalade, was kind of redone about 15 to 20 years ago. And a lot of very, very famous female singers came on to sing that together as an homage to Labelle, and to just, you know, do it because it's such a great song and another generation needed to hear it. So you can see their space-agey costumes, which Nona Hendrix, one of the singers, I'm pointing to her right now, had a lot to do with that. The lead singer right here is Patti Labelle. And this is what she looks like, kind of like now, which is kind of funny, right? Because she looks so mommy and homey here, but look how she was dressed in the space costumes in the 1970s. Well, this is the cover of her best-selling cookbook. So if you're interested in checking out Patti Labelle's recipes, I heard the sweet potato pie one was really good. You can go check that out. And this was Sarah, I forgot her last name. And she used to live in a building across from me, and one of my bosses in the past was her neighbor in Washington, D.C. So remember at the beginning of the semester when I gave you all a handout, I posted it, What Makes That Black? And I said, if there was one text for this class that you should have or buy, it would be this book. If you didn't buy any other book for this semester, this should be the one. So I went through all 75 principles of what makes that Black, the concepts, the aesthetic concepts, and tried to pick out which ones are dominant to the whole discourse of Afrofuturism. So this is a list that I put together, which you can just skim through, pause it and like look through it. So one of those concepts is coolness. Before I get a little bit more into that, I just want to have you think about this question. Why are people hungry for Afrofuturism? Yeah, there's some people who are hungry for it. They can't wait for the next stuff that's like Black Panther or, you know, whatever it is. Like, where is it more of it? They're hungry for it. How do they find more? How do they read more books? How do they get more songs? Like, what kind of architecture are people doing? So the number one reason could be it's cool. And it's new and inspirational. It offers fresh, contemporary, avant-garde, or even radical new perspectives for examining and solving universal human problems relevant to this precise moment. I would say future problems, near future problems as well, for Black people specifically. There's a book called Aesthetic of the Cool, written by Robert Ferris Thompson. He happens to be a white man and one of the foremost scholars in African-American culture. So he's at Yale University, and he wrote this book about what the term cool means within Black diasporic cultures. And the thing about it is, actually, I thought that I read one time that the word cool was actually an African word. And now, so I'm not so sure about that because I couldn't find it on his list. And I think if it was actually an African word, then he would have put it on this list. And so I thought this was interesting and thought I should include it, which is different words for cool in West African cultures. So this is two parts. It's going to be 2 slides. This is the first half of the page. And I just took pictures of I made PDFs of the page in the book. And this is the second one. This book is also by Robert Ferris Thompson, and it's an absolutely essential book to African-American aesthetics and Black diaspora aesthetics to read. You're reading a story about Octavia Butler this week. She has a cult following. She is probably the #1 most famous science fiction writer there is. So she died in around 2006. I was happy to have actually gone to a reading at a small Black-owned bookstore here in LA and met her in person. And all I could think of is that if Sojourner Truth had been able to read and write, that she would have been like Octavia Butler. Anyway, I'm including some quotes here of Octavia Butler just to get us started on the conversation. The story that you're reading is called Speech Sounds. And this quote actually refers directly to the theme, the premise, the what if speculative premise of the story. Here's another quote from Octavia Butler. And this one is my favorite. There's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. Here are some titles by Octavia Butler. I've read 8 of her novels out of, I don't know how many she's written, I would probably say there's probably about 15 plus a lot of short stories. She is probably, it's hard to say, but she might be my favorite writer ever, like novelist. And second behind that, or right there neck and neck with her, would be Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston. So my favorite novel by Octavia Butler is Wild Seed, although I think Lilith's Brood is the wildest one, which deals with the most concepts. So Wild Seed is about a woman who lives in during the slave era in Africa, in Nigeria, and she's an Igbo woman, Igbo, the ethnic group, and she gets sought out by a spirit who used to be a real man 3,000 years prior in ancient Nubia, Black ancient Nubia of the Egypt area of Africa, and for 3,000 years he's been traveling around the world in his magical ways, attracted to people who have special powers, superpowers, magical powers, and gifts and talents. And he's collecting them as he experiments with trying to create his idea of what a perfect human being would be. And so he has a colony in upstate New York where he brings these people at the time that he meets our main character. And he seduces her out of her village by telling her that he's going to give her children that will not outlive her. She's lived for 300 years and 8 generations, outlived 8 generations of children. So she's considered a healer and kind of witchy, and she's sort of lives on the outskirts of her village. And so this man is like, I'm going to give you a family. I'm going to give you a place to live that's peaceful and safe and all these wonderful things. And we're going to go on this amazing journey on a boat to get there. And so she actually walks with him alongside the slave trade happening and reports on what's happening that she sees as she's getting on a ship as a free Black woman to go to the United States as well. And the story then becomes about how people aren't allowed to leave his colony. and he's a totalitarian and an abusive man. And so what ends up happening is that she suffers through many years of being with him because she can't die, and neither can he. And then she decides to run away, and I'm giving you the spoiler. She decides to finally get the courage to leave him, and she starts her own exact same project, but people can come and go willingly and freely, and it's a loving environment. In her colony is in the Louisiana area. So I'm just telling you about that in case you would ever want to read it. That's the one I recommend. Also, this book, Kindred, was illustrated by John Jennings, the person I introduced a little earlier and said was a scholar and was doing those book covers. It's a graphic novel of one, what you see here is the graphic novel version or adaptation of another of Octavia Butler's novels. It was her first novel to project her into notoriety. And that one is about family as well, where she gets pulled back into the past. And she's being pulled by an ancestor who's white, a white boy who is the son of a slave owner, who becomes the lover of one of her Black female ancestors. And so she doesn't have control over this ancestor pulling her back into the past. But every time she's summoned back into the past, he doesn't know that he's doing it. But when she's going back, he's in some type of situation where he's almost about to die, he's in danger, that kind of thing. Well, she doesn't know how long she's going to be stuck there. So at times she's stuck there for like lengths of time, like 10 years and things like that, and has to be an enslaved person. Although in her real contemporary life, she is a Black woman who lives in Pasadena, which is where Octavia actually lived and wrote for most of her life. And so I'm going to leave it there because I wanted us to transition into the concept of family a bit. I wanted to tell you about Octavia Butler's other work a little bit more than what you're reading. The interesting thing about the short story that you're reading is it is extremely similar to Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, which are also two, they're not here in this list, who are remarkably similar to this two novels that are sequels, which follow a girl who's 16 years old and lives in the Los Angeles area in a slightly futuristic setting where there's a drug that's making people set fires. There's corporate feudalism where people are exchanging their freedom to live on corporate land, like work for corporations and live on the land. The corporations don't pay them any money, so they don't actually make any profit, but the corporations feed them and clothe them and protect them. And so that's what's become the, the societal structure of the time that she lives in. And her family has been trying to hold out with a group of outliers, and their community, but it finally gets attacked and it turns the survivors of her neighborhood into refugees who are trying to get to land that she says her family owns in Oregon, where they can start a new life. And a special thing about it is that it's kind of dystopian, and a lot of people started rereading it or reading it for the first time during the beginning of COVID. And there's a lot of similarities to our time now, which is the time that the novel was set, even though she wrote the novel, I don't know, 30 years ago or something like that. Here's John Jennings with his partner, who also helped him to illustrate Kindred, Damien Dufee. So Damien's white. And one of the things, again, that I want to introduce about Afrofuturism is that sometimes the genres require a certain amount of capital and collaboration. And so white people and people who are non-Black are there as well. And even in the short story anthologies and art exhibits, people who are not Black are sometimes included as well. They could be white, they could be Indian, they could be, Latino, Asian. It's really, really interesting. So Octavia's Brood is a book, it's an anthology of short stories written by social justice activists, more so than pure writers. So they are actually thinking about, and this is becoming a trend, that academics and scholars are thinking of Afrofuturism as encompassing anything that speculates on the future of Blackness, Black people, things that are relevant to Black people. And so they specifically talk about how being an activist requires a certain level of Afrofuturist thinking, philosophical thinking. So that was just showing an event that was happening for the book and one of the sort of like organizers of the book. Samuel Delaney was, or he's still alive, is actually given the title of the first pure Black science fiction writer. And he started writing or getting books published in the 50s or 60s, I think, or early 70s, somewhere around that time. And so he thought of himself as a science fiction writer. You can find many lists now that talk about Afrofuturist literature and its history. They're often pulling from the past in ways that maybe, you know, because the term didn't even exist back then, that the original artists didn't think of it that way themselves. But, you know, the new scholars are bringing their works in to have them examined in this sort of context. But Samuel Delaney is the first person that I believe, you know, everyone who's a scholar of Afrofuturism says, hey, look, he's the first pure Black science fiction writer. He's super light skinned, almost light enough to pass for white, which is really interesting as well. So this is one of his novels, and this is another. I've read Never Yona. The ironic thing, and this was, I point this out to you for a reason. We can see the man's booty right here, and that he looks white, and so does this woman possibly look, she looks white too. In the early days of science fiction, and this could be the same across other genres of Black writing, but particularly science fiction, the writers had almost no control whatsoever of what was put on the cover. The companies would tell you what's marketable and what isn't, which also would create the problem of Black science fiction, Black speculative work, not getting published at all, because they would tell you there's no market for Black science fiction. Black people don't like science fiction. And so that would be film as well and other genres if white people were in control of this, you know, opportunities for these Black creatives. So you can see the difference between these two, but they also don't show a Black person on the cover. And that was the case for a lot of the early work. Even Octavia Butler's work, they would not put Black people on her covers. This is one of the first anthologies of Black speculative fiction. It was put together and edited by Cherie Thompson. It includes some of these writers here. A couple of them I've already mentioned. And so you're reading one of the stories from this book. It's one of the most joyous kind of, Black futurist, you know, Afrofuturist, Black speculative short stories that I've ever read. And so that's why I wanted to include it. I didn't want you to just see things that were dystopian, like the future's bad and everything falls apart and it's so sad. And, but this is a pretty joyous love poem by Kalamu Yasalam. His daughter is also a writer and writes brilliantly as well. Imperium Imperio, I'm just bringing this back in because if you find those lists of early Afrofuturist literature, you may see this book by Sutton E. Griggs there. And it does have things that encompass the Black speculative in it. I highly recommend reading the novel. And I talked about Of One Blood, earlier in the semester also. Both of these particular novels do deal with Black people in Black speculative settings. They're not exactly futuristic, but the characters time travel or they magically travel, things magically happen. And you can kind of read them and see how they could be a film and how magical things could happen in the film. Of One Blood is particularly interesting because it deals with the mixed ancestry and the close family relations that don't get talked about in the United States. And so, and that is that the truth is almost every person who's been in America for a few generations, or at least had ancestors from the slave era, you know, living here during the slave era, has relatives that are Black and white. That would be the white people have Black relatives that they don't know about, and the Black people have white relatives that they don't know about. And so this book really takes up that idea and really explores the concept thoroughly in the novel, as well as having a character go to a Black character who doesn't know they're Black, but then finds they're Black, and then finds out that they find a sense of pride in self and their Blackness by journeying to Africa and landing in a magical city that's kind of Wakanda-ish. And this was around 1900, believe it or not. Sun Ra. Sun Ra is a jazz musician. I think he has passed away. So Sun Ra is definitely a #1 icon of Afrofuturism. So you're going to take a look at Space is the Place. If you want to watch it, it's kind of campy and fun to watch. But if you don't have time to watch the whole thing, just skim through it and kind of get some idea of what it looks like and what the storyline is and what's going on. This is actually Sun Ra and some of his people on his spaceship. And it has really cool jazz music that is considered, Afrofuturistic as well. Here's a painting by Mark Stephen Greenfield. And a lot of Afrofuturistic artwork and imagery is created digitally. It uses technology to create the artwork. But there's some artists who do drawing and painting with traditional, Western art media, and they're exploring themes of Afrofuturism. So, sometimes it could just be like one thing that the creative person made, or it could be a body or a series of work. I'm not sure how many artists specifically dedicate everything that they do to Afrofuturism, but this was a really great show that happened in Los Angeles in the past couple years. And Mark Stephen Greenfield does artwork on different themes that have been relevant to our course this entire semester. He's also one of my mentors. All right, Lamar Peterson is the artist who had the artwork on the cover of the slideshow. So this is him and a self-portrait of himself a little younger. See that it's kind of weird. And his paintings are always kind of cool and weird. So they really could fall under the whole umbrella of Black speculative. I just happened to choose 2 paintings where the people are facing forward, looking out at the viewer. I didn't mean to do that, but he has other work that you can go find and look up, really wonderful paintings. This is an art show that you can go check out that the Studio Museum of Harlem put up called When the Shadows Took Shape. It has a really, really amazing catalog, which is actually a thick book full of essays written by scholars on what Afrofuturism is and what it means in visual art, fine art, visual art. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. I bought the book. It is amazing. This is an artist named Jacoby Satterwhite, and he does work that's very homoerotic and uses a lot of technology and can be seen as falling under the realm of Black speculative. For example, they're usually quite large scale. Here's another album cover, Cosmic Slop from Funkadelic. And there was a TV show, it's called Cosmic Slop, but it had 3 parts to it. And they're like short films, they're not quite full lengths. And like they fall under the realm of Black speculative, and Cosmic Slop is one of them. I didn't include it in, as one of your materials to watch, but you may think it's interesting. The premise is that some aliens from outer space arrive to the United States and talk to the political establishment and tell them that they can make all the problems of America go away if they'll just give them all the Black people. Turn over all the Black people to the aliens. And the thing is, Black people have to get measured on a melanin meter before the aliens will accept them. So it's kind of an absurdist, speculative work about how, our politicians at that time, the early 90s, would respond to this request. And so it's kind of funny and kind of weird and kind of sad, and definitely, has elements of Afrofuturism and the fantastic and magic realism in it. It's an interesting film to watch. Of course, Black Panther, which probably all of you have seen. What I'm recommending is that you go check out, if you ever can, The Art of Black Panther. It's a Marvel book. It's like the book of all the aspects of the art design and production, the concept work, which is like digital paintings, sketches, and illustrations of what every aspect of the film was going to look like. Everything from jewelry to the sets, the weapons, the fonts and the language, like every aspect is really, really, really well done book. This is one of the original comics. I'm not sure if it was like reproduced or something like that, but I just chose this one because it's early and it has Jack Kirby's name on it. And so Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, were the originators of, were the creators, the original creators of the Black Panther story, which has become a long narrative over the comic strips. And then it was put into, made into a film. Black Panther comics are still coming out now. And so, the film just shows an aspect of the story. And Jack and Stan were white Jews, which is really interesting, right? Because you might have thought, wow, only a Black person could have come up with that story, but they were Jews, white Jews. And so I found this interesting article that talks about how Black Panther might be a milestone in Black Jewish relationships. And you can stop and just read this, and just if you go visit this site, it will tell you all the things that a lot of like really positive things. But this passage talks about when things started to go sour between white Jews in America and the Black activist. And so it explains why this happened. And I just want to emphasize that white Jews have been absolutely essential to every early effort at civil rights that this country has ever had. They were major funders of the founders and funders of the NAACP in the 19-teens through the 1960s. They also participated and put their lives on the line also for, the civil rights movement, seeing that it would benefit themselves. And one of their ways of thinking about this was that they saw that African-American activists had the vision and the numbers to be able to mobilize and to make America a more inclusive society, a more just society for all people. But they didn't have the money. Jews who were leaving Europe had a larger amount of money than African Americans in America did. So they would help to fund the activism of African American artists, and they participated in it. So something happened though, and it started a break here during the 60s, about the time that the Black Panther comic strip came out, which is that Black people started to not like Zionism and the way that white Jews in America were, and around the world, were supporting Israel, and felt that where the Black activists identified more with Palestinians. And to this day, this still may be true, that Black activists tend to, be critical of Zionism and support the Palestinian efforts and activism more than they would those of the Jews of Israel. So something kind of interesting is Zambia's Forgotten Space Program. So this man right here, his first name was Edward, and he lived in Zambia in the 1960s, and he was a school teacher. He declared that Zambia would go into space and that Zambia had a space program. And so here's him training people in his neighborhood to become astronauts. So check out their suits, they're kind of homemade. This is really campy and fun and kitschy, and it's just a lovely story. A white female artist from Spain came across this story and decided to do a photographic fantasy-like Afrofuturistic project, trying to manifest his vision and build on it in ways that kind of blur the line between fact and fiction. And it's really quite wonderful. And there we go, back to that question of who gets to be called an Afrofuturist? And so when we talk about Afrofuturism, it's also interesting to talk about how Black Panther and the Afrofuturist, movement is influencing things that are happening in real life in Africa. So the rapper Akon is building a real life Wakanda in Senegal. And so you can research that on your own and just check it out. It's pretty interesting. And in another place, the former ambassador for the African Union, which is kind of like an organization that represents regions of Africa in political issues, has been going around and fundraising and promoting the Wakanda City of Return in Ghana, so that there would be a place for tourism in Ghana. So another place in Africa built off this concept of Wakanda, the kind of like Black utopia in Africa. And so one of the things that she talked about in an article that not an article, but something that I saw that happened this past weekend is that there's a relationship with African Ancestry, which is a DNA company. There's several different DNA companies, but African Ancestry is actually Black owned and has been creating relationships with different governments of different countries to help promote tourism and the whole idea of Black people of the African diaspora traveling back to Africa and resettling, re-immigrating to Africa. Not re-immigrating, that's not the quite right word, but immigrating. And this is a poet named Tracy K Smith. She wrote a book of poetry called Life on Mars. And you can go explore her poetry. There's a couple samples of it online. I didn't put this in the module for the week. I tried to put, let me just stop there, but you can go check her out. And the song by King Pleasure, not thought of as a traditional Afrofuturist person at all. His music is quite traditional by our standards today. And there's nothing about the way he looks that's representing Afrofuturism. But if you read the liner notes of this album, Golden Days, you see that he was far out in his thinking. He advocates a theory called planetism, and it's all about science fiction, how he's an outer space alien and all these space-agey concepts that he's playing around with on the album notes. And so it almost sounds exactly like things Sun Ra says in the movie Space is the Place. And so this is one generation ahead of Sun Ra. I'll leave it at that. So speaking of generations, the Parliament and Funkadelic, George Clinton was one of the singers in Parliament, is still inspiring artists today. One of them is Andre 3000, one of the rappers in the duo I mentioned before, Outcast. People could look at him and think, oh, wow, he's kind of like a George Clinton for, the 1990s, the 2000s. This person I just ran into randomly on the internet was like designing costumes for George Clinton. These are contemporary. These are inspired by this man right here, George Clinton. And he's standing on the mothership, by the way. And so this is kind of cool that, younger artists are still playing with, George Clinton is still inspiring younger artists. This is something that I think is interesting and I'm going to check out. A theater director had all of the plays get canceled at the beginning of COVID. So what she decided to do, especially with the civil unrest that was happening with Black Lives Matter movement and everything, she invited, or the theater invited 21 playwrights to create theatrical plays about Black people in the future, like Black people and their future, Black people in the future, Black and the idea of futurism. I think it's pretty cool and really relevant to right now. So I recommend that we all check that one out together. Here is a screenshot from the website so you can see some of the playwrights. Just want to say that I try very hard to balance things in, balance my examples of everything in the course so that I'm representing male and female. All right, and you can find so many curated lists because there's such a, rapidly growing curiosity about Afrofuturism and the Black speculative. So you can find these lists. You can just put Afrofuturism in literature, Afrofuturism in visual art, all these different genres, and find lists that are being curated by individuals, by scholars and professors, by libraries, by organizations. And so that's pretty cool. And one of the things that you can do if you want to find out more is do this, research hashtag Wakanda syllabus. So as soon as Black Panther came out, the movie, and its success, there were people who were like, where can I find more of that? Like people wanted more of it. So a lot of professors started using this hashtag Wakanda syllabus to, put courses together to teach at the college level, but also make it available for other people who are interested in lists that told them what they should go read or watch or explore. And so another thing I wanted to mention is that next week, we're going to talk about the focus on children and youth in Afrofuturism. Another thing I wanted to mention is, dance doesn't usually, I don't think it's usually talked about so much in the discourse of Afrofuturism, except that, it comes along with the music and it's an interpretation of the music. So, the dance is a response to the technoculture, the developing technoculture of hip hop. Another thing that's interesting is how the vibe language. I put this here and I don't know why I put it there. I don't know how it relates to all of this stuff here, but probably just I want to say that Afrofuturism even impacts language. And so the Vai language is a language from an ethnic group in Liberia that is used in Black Panther as their language and on the text and the font of everything in the film. And so some designers have actually taken up the Vai language and made like clothing and other types of products that are being sold that have the Wakanda language on them, which is the Vai language from Liberia, which also was the original site where free Blacks went to Africa during the slave era or afterwards to go back to Africa, to return to the motherland. Another thing that's happening is that a lot of the Afrofuturists are exploring Black sub-Saharan religions, the mythologies and the religions. The difference between mythology and religion is that mythology means a religion that no one practices anymore, but religion, even if from our point of view, it's mythological, is really and actually a religion if people still practice it. And so Ifa from Nigeria is having a profound impact on Afrofuturism. Oh, and so here's an example of, how technoculture can impact a dance. And so this is Michael Jackson doing the moonwalk. So we could think about this and being a Afrofuturist dance. So this is the last slide, and this was actually the longest slideshow that I put together. So I hope it's not an hour and a half of me talking. I lose track of time when I'm like doing these things. But this is it kind of like shows you what an iconic artwork of Afrofuturism can often look like, which is you can see that it's digitally put together. It's kind of a collage-y, and it has elements of past, present, and future, and it's kind of spacey. So she's hit right on all of the tropes of the genre. And so if you're interested in that work, you can go explore what she does, Jessie Jumanji. So I think that is the last slide of this lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it.